Don Knuts made America laugh for 50 years with his nervous speaking at a luncheon, but his daughter Karen recently revealed the truth. At the age of 10, she became her father's therapist, and while he played the nervous guy on TV, he actually suffered from panic attacks, depression, and thoughts of suicide. Karen had to talk him out of these dark places. No child should ever see the man who won 5 Emmys. Don Knott's birth on July 24, 1924, was unexpected and shocking. His mother, Elsie, was already in her 40s, and his father suffered from mental instability. Don's 3 older brothers were nearly adults. The eldest was born in 1906, and the youngest was born in 1910, a 14-year gap. Author Daniel DeWitt later described Knott as the accidental child, or the baby no one had anticipated. The family had recently lost their farm, so they were in a tight financial spot. Since his father couldn't work, his mother had to turn to renting rooms to college students. Their house on University Avenue in Morgantown wasn't a home, but rather a chaotic collection of strangers and a place of overwhelming sadness. Don, in particular, slept on a cot in the kitchen every night, falling asleep to the sound of dishes clinking, leftover food smells, and loud voices. There was no privacy, quiet, or comfort, and he had to wake up to the sound of people talking and laughing. Stroll past the living room where his father, Jesse, drank excessively and suffered from what some think was schizophrenia. He was a violent, unpredictable, and terrifying man who would yell, lash out, and even grab a knife. At the age of 30, Don's mother asked him, "Do you remember when you were a baby and your father held a knife to your throat?" He either didn't remember or buried the memory, but it wasn't limited to his father. Despite the fact that his older brothers, Willis and William Earl, who were known as Shadow, were heavy drinkers and often taunted, mocked, and otherwise treated him more like an annoyance than a brother, Don still looked up to Shadow because, despite everything, Shadow had a great sense of humor and could make people laugh, even in that dysfunctional household. For a short time, Shadow represented Don's only hope, but then he passed away in 1941. Due to an asthma attack while still a teenager, Don lost his father in 1937 and his only brother the following year. The pain was too much for him to bear, so he made a ventriloquist dummy named Danny to help him cope. At school, he kept to himself, looked pale and sickly all the time, and was always nervous. However, he found something when he acted out and made people laugh. They paid attention, liked him for a little while, and he felt seen, fulfilling his need for. After Jess's death, Elsie turned their home into a full-time boarding house, and he struggled with deep anxiety and depression. His comedy was shaped by the nervous, twitchy characters he became famous for, but behind the scenes, he battled these issues. His daughter Karen said she often had to act as his therapist. The trauma never really left the home. College boys came and went, and his mother tried to enforce rules and kick girls out of the room she rented, but it didn't work. When Jesse passed away at the age of 55, it was a huge burden lifted off Don's shoulders. He could finally breathe, make friends, and even serve as class president. However, this newfound freedom came at a cost. Elsie was left to run a boarding house as a widow with 4 boys to feed and no money in the bank. Don eventually found a way to overcome this. A ventriloquist dummy named Danny, who provided him with a sense of security. When he spoke through Danny, it was as if his pain had a voice that wasn't his own. By the time he reached high school, Don had transformed his trauma into a talent. From 1938 to 1942, he performed professionally at Morgantown High School, earning $25 to $50 per show. In today's money, that would be around $400 to. Don's talent kept his family afloat during the tail end of the Great Depression. He performed 3 to 4 shows every weekend across Monongalia County, and even advertised his gigs in newspapers. After graduating in 1942, he set his sights on New York City, becoming a household name. People knew him and even booked him a year in advance. He was still a teenager, but he was already running a small entertainment business. Armed with $300 in savings, a cardboard suitcase, and an abundance of self-assurance, he set out to find a small room near Times Square for $8 per week. He then began to knock on doors at talent agencies, nightclubs, and theaters, but the big city was uninterested in small-town stars. The war had altered the entertainment industry, and now people preferred jazz, swing, polished stage performances, and ventriloquism. Don lasted for 3 weeks before his funds ran out, so he pawned Danny for cash and purchased a bus ticket back. He went back to Morgantown, devastated and $50 in debt. That was his first real failure, but it also showed him what it took to make it big. That fall, Don enrolled at West Virginia University with the intention of becoming a teacher. He majored in education and joined the Phi Sigma Kappa fraternity, but he never really put Danny away. He continued performing at campus events, gradually regaining his confidence, and then the draft came. Don realized he could either wait to be called up or take control when the age dropped in early 1943. He enlisted on March 15th, hoping to steer his own path at Fort Hays. After basic training at Camp Crowder, Missouri, Don wasn't just another soldier. His gift for timing, humor, and morale building was noticed. The military needed entertainers, not fighters, so instead of rejection, he found the first real opportunity that would shape his career was a comedy show called Stars and Grips. It wasn't just a catchy name. It took place in the middle of a war zone. Instead of firing bullets, Don Knotts told jokes, did ventriloquist routines, and dove for cover during air raids in the Pacific. Most soldiers had rifles, but he had a dummy named Danny Hooch Matador. They performed for anxious and exhausted soldiers, and occasionally, just before Japanese bombing raids lit up the sky, one of his fellow performers, Al Chico, said the Don's act with his dummy was a hit with the crowd, but he secretly despised the dummy he had been dragging around for months. Attacks happened at regular intervals, right before he sang his first song. The entire cast would hide in foxholes during the performance, but they would eventually emerge to continue their act. They toured for months, performing on aircraft carriers and remote islands. He had been around since junior high, but in the middle of all the mayhem and tragedy, something changed inside him. As he was unloading equipment one day, the suitcase containing Danny mysteriously disappeared. When someone inquired as to its whereabouts, Knott simply shrugged and mumbled, "I don't know." However, years later, he confessed that he had thrown the dummy into the Pacific Ocean. He had grown tired of playing the straight man to A. What most people don't realize is that Don Knotts, the solo comedian, was decorated despite never touching a battlefield. He was drafted in 1943 and even served his country honorably. In one version of the story, he joked that he could hear the dummy screaming as the waves carried it away. In his autobiography, he softened the story and said he left it on a beach, but to his friends, he told the truth. Danny went overboard that moment. Despite being just 100 pounds, he was required to sign a waiver in order to serve. However, by the time he retired in 1946, he had amassed an impressive collection of medals, including the World War II Victory Medal, the Philippine Liberation Medal, the Asiatic Pacific Campaign Medal, and 4 Bronze Service Stars, one for each campaign. He had served in locations such as New Guinea and the Philippines, where bombs weren't just a possibility, they were expected. He served for nearly 3 years, from June 21, 1943, to January 6, 1946, and his service number was 35 to 756 to 356. Despite being an entertainer, he wasn't just clowning around. He earned the Army Marksman Badge and could shoot an M1 carbine. He also received the American Campaign Medal, the Army Good Conduct Medal, and the Honorable Service Lapel Pin. His neighbors in West Virginia joked that the country must have been crazy to send someone like him off to fight. After completing basic training at Fort Bliss, he received a telegram from Washington, D.C., ordering him to join the Army. The top brass valued his comedic timing more than his combat skills, and by the time he left the service, he had achieved the rank of Technician Grade 5, the equivalent of a corporal in the Army. He immediately returned to school and earned a theater degree from West Virginia University in 1948, with minors in speech and drama. He also joined Sigma Chi. It's strange that the university's radio station rejected him, claiming his voice wasn't suitable for radio, but that rejection would later seem absurd. On December 27, 1947, just a few months before graduation, Dawn married a fellow student named Kay Metz. She was the daughter of a Baptist minister from Wheeling. After graduating in spring 1948, things weren't. Dawn, who was struggling financially, took a job selling toys at a department store in Morgantown. One day, the man playing Santa Claus approached Dawn and said something powerful but simple. "Give New York another shot." That one sentence ignited a fire under Dawn, and he and Kay set out for the big city with only $120, with another $100 borrowed from Dawn's brother. New York didn't exactly shower him with success, but he did start to experience some good fortune. His first big break came on A. Dawn played the role of Wendy Wales, a silly, loudmouth sidekick influenced by classic Western movie characters like Gabby Hayes. The show had previously aired in the 1930s, but upon its return in 1949, Knott's character immediately became the most beloved part of the program. It lasted until 1955, surpassing other kid-friendly classics such as Superman, Sky King, and Captain Midnight. Dawn's first steady paycheck in the industry came from this role. He had landed the job through a connection with Lanny Ross, a radio host. A man he met while serving who introduced him to a talent agent. Dawn's career took a turn when he decided to focus on comedy instead of his ventriloquist dummy, which he had thrown into the Pacific during the war. As television began to gain popularity in the early 1950s, Dawn stepped into the world of serious on-screen acting for the first time with a 2-year stint on the CBS soap opera Search for Tomorrow, running from 1953 to 1955. Despite working with future stars like Lee Grant, Robert Lova, and Kevin Bacon on the show, Dawn's time on Search for Tomorrow didn't make him famous. In 1953, for example, he played a man in a coma, and the producers used a unique TV trick, filming him moving around before the broadcast, and superimposed it over the live broadcast to create a dream sequence. From 1956 to 1960, Dawn appeared on the nationally broadcast variety show The Steve Allen Show, where he became famous for his character, the Nervous Man. In these fake interviews, he would pretend to be a surgeon, demolition expert, or someone else with a high-stakes profession, but in reality, he would look terrified, trembling, and out of place. A nervous character from a dream inspired the rest of the act the moment Dawn woke up. At first, not everyone understood. A nightclub owner in Manhattan thought the routine was dull. However, when Dawn performed it for his fellow actors in the Broadway show No Time for Sergeants, they couldn't stop laughing, which told him he had something. Gary Moore gave him airtime, and Steve. From struggling comic to household name, Don Knotts met Andy Griffith in 1955. Their lives were forever changed when they were cast together in a Broadway play called No Time for Sergeants. The play opened on October 20th at the Alvin Theater in New York. Their bond on stage carried over behind the scenes, and they clicked immediately. Both were from small towns, and they had that easy Southern charm. Allen brought him on his primetime show, and audiences loved it overnight. As the play was adapted into a film in 1958, Don Knotts made his big screen debut. The film retained most of the Broadway cast, including Andy Griffith. In February 1960, while playing bridge at a friend's house in Los Angeles, Knotts noticed something more. He called Andy Griffith and pitched the idea of what would happen if a small-town sheriff named Andy Taylor had an overconfident deputy. As a deputy, Griffith had a new opportunity that would not only land him a job, but also give birth to one of the most iconic characters in television history, Barney Fay. This wasn't an arbitrary idea. Griffith and Knott had worked together before in No Time for Sergeants, and their chemistry was already established behind the scenes. Executive producer Sheldon Leonard pretended to be unsure, telling Knott that he would take the role under advisement, but in reality, Leonard wanted Knott for the role. Knott still had a few weeks to wait. Production on the Steve Allen Show, so Leonardo kept his cool. 3 weeks later, it was official, Barney Fay was in. Without that call, the Andy Griffith Show might have been another forgotten sitcom. The problem was that, in the first episode, Andy Griffith was supposed to play the straight man, Don Knotts. However, everything changed when he saw Knotts in action during the manhunt in the second episode. He acknowledged in an interview from 1993 that the roles needed to be reversed, saying, "I was supposed to be the comic, but when Don came on I realized he should be funny, and I should play straight to him." This realization saved the show, and the writers and studio electricians swiftly rewrote the dynamic, shifting the focus to the anarchy caused by Barney's overconfidence and the calm problem-solving of Sheriff Taylor. Would ensure the show's success, one predicted to Griffin, "You'll be in the top 10 in 6 months." The prediction came true. The chemistry was electric, and viewers adored it. What followed was pure dominance. Don Knotts wasn't content to play a comical sidekick. He became the industry standard from 1961 to 1967, winning 5 Emmys for Outstanding Supporting Actor, with a 2-year hiatus in 1964 and 1965, but he rebounded. The Museum of Broadcast Communications characterized Barney as having an unforgettable combination of comedic and tragic elements, as well as being self-important, overly romantic, and occasionally cruel. Despite facing competition from Hollywood heavyweights like George C. Scott and Robert Redford, Knotts continued to win Emmys. In fact, Guinness World Records even recorded this as the most Emmys won by a lead actor playing the same role in the same series. However, in 1965, things took a surprising turn. Knotts had previously believed that the show would end after 5 years, as Griffin had stated it multiple times. As a result, during the 5th season, Knotts began to plan his future, signing a 5-film deal with Universal Studios. Just when he was about to move on, CBS convinced Griffin to continue the show for at least 3 more years. This shocked Knotts, and Andy suddenly announced that he was going to stay on, saying, "It was a tough time for me. I hated to leave." With this new information, the plot took a surprising turn. But he had already committed to the films, so the timing couldn't be changed. His departure left a huge hole in the show, and fans noticed it right away. Many thought it was because the show lost its creative spark without Knotts, whose charming chaos and charisma had brought the show's humor. Then, as a real gut punch, Andy Griffith became wealthy through the majority. After 5 years of making the show a hit and winning 5 Emmys, Knotts finally asked for more than half of the show, just a small share, but Griffin misunderstood and gave him a shockingly low cut of the show. At the time, Knotts' salary was around $1,250 per episode, or about $35,000 a year. Not exactly peanuts, but compared to Griffin's cut, it was shockingly low. As a result of a misunderstanding, their business partnership came to an end. In 1964, Knott signed a 5-year deal with Universal Studios president Lew Wasserman. The deal was more than just a regular contract. It granted Don the freedom to choose his own projects, work with the writers he trusted the most, and star in at least one movie per year, with full support from the studio. It was a dream come true for a child who grew up under Knott's guidance. Before television even existed, this was everything. However, there was frustration behind the excitement. CBS was paying Andy Griffith a massive $1 million per year to continue hosting the Andy Griffith Show, but they only offered Don $150,000. Even when he played Barney Fay, earning Emmys and widespread love, he made less than $100,000 per year. The Universal deal was more than just good money. It felt like finally being seen. Don's first big movie with Universal, The Ghost and Mr. Chicken, made $4 million in 5 months. The budget was. It was a victory, but it wasn't quite a smash. The film did best in the Midwest and the South, and few people in New York had heard of it. The Reluctant Astronaut, released in 1967, only made $36. His films continued to earn modest revenues, but not enough to thrill Universal, and by 1971, following the release of How to Frame a Figure, the studio decided to. He decided not to renew his contract because the box office wasn't matching his TV stardom. However, things changed in 1975 when Disney came into the picture. They placed Don in the Apple Dumpling Gang starring Tim Conway, and the film pulled in $36 million. Despite their comic incompetence, the pairing was a hit with 8 million viewers, who enjoyed Conway as the slow-witted idiot and Don as the anxious clever one. The 1979 sequel also brought in $24. Disney saw potential in Don's teamwork and began pairing him with Conway in films like Gus, No Deposit, No Return, and Herbie Goes to Monte Carlo. With the right partner, Don's awkward charisma became comedic gold, but his 1970 variety show bombed. With $9 million, Disney saw what Universal missed. Knott attempted to transform him into a musical comedy host, but he was more of a supporting actor than a lead. The show's cancellation after only one season left Don devastated. He had been striving to shed his Barney F image, and this setback only served to deepen his disappointment. However, in 1979, an unexpected source provided him with a chance for redemption. THRE's company was in need of a new Norman. The producers of Don offered him the role of Mr. Furley without even asking for an audition. At first, Don was scared because he thought the cast was too young and cool, and the show was filmed in front of a live audience, which he had never done before. However, his fears were put to rest when, as he stepped onto the stage, the audience gave him a standing ovation that lasted almost 10 minutes. That moment erased all doubt. During his first season, the show's rating skyrocketed to number 2, the highest they had ever been. Don's new character was A. Mr. Furley's personal life was even more complicated than his career, which had its ups and downs. He married his college sweetheart, Kay Metz, in 1947. She was the daughter of a minister, and her father officiated the wedding. They had 2 children, Thomas and Karen, but as Farley's career took off, younger fans who had never seen Andy Griffith's show fell in love with him all over again. Don's marriage crumbled in 1964 after 17 years of marriage due to his increasing anxiety, long hours on set, and depression. He became a single parent, raising his daughter Karen at the age of 10 during one of the most difficult times in his life. Karen found herself emotionally caring for her father due to his panic attacks and low moods. He was a supportive parent who encouraged his daughter to follow her dreams, even though he cautioned her against a career in show business. He wasn't always humorous. Sometimes he was just plain sad, but he was always there for her. In 1974, he remarried Laura Lee Chuckna, his second wife, and they lived a low-key life together. However, their marriage was strained by Don's mental decline and his diagnosis of macular degeneration, a progressive eye disease. Karen began to open up about her life with Don after their 1983 divorce. She described his emotional swings, deep depression, and struggles with childhood trauma. She recalled how he would become trapped in a cycle of negative thoughts, and how she often felt like she was drowning in his despair. Laura Lee said that he lived as if he had a bucket list, terrified of going blind, and his constant fear of illness and obsession with symptoms caused the marriage to fall apart. Frances Yarba worked on her father's show, What a Country, in the late 80s. She helped him remember his lines. He was in his 60s, but they bonded quickly because they both came from chaotic families. Frances described Don as the most vulnerable man she had ever met. Shortly after meeting Frances, Don quit the show. Even as a child, she sensed her dad might fall apart without her. They were married in 2002, but Don insisted that she keep quiet about his health issues, even from Andy Griffith, because he wanted to work and was afraid no one would hire him. Don had a secret fear of being sick. His hypochondria was well known. At the age of 57, his worst nightmare came true. He was diagnosed with macular degeneration. His vision began to deteriorate. He eventually lost the ability to drive, read, and recognize faces. He had always been afraid of getting sick, so this was a cruel twist. However, he found perspective when he told the New York Times, "I bet a blind person would give their right arm to have the vision I have." Then, he was diagnosed with lung cancer. He didn't tell many people about it, but he kept filming. He voiced a character in Disney's Chicken Little and made guest appearances on shows like The Show. Unfortunately, his health continued to decline, and he ended up in the Cedars-Sinai Hospital with pneumonia caused by the cancer. Don Knott passed away on February 24, 2006, at the age of 81, with his old friend Andy Griffin by his side. In his last moments, he whispered, "Breathe, Jess. You've got to make it. You've got to pull through." His brief period of improvement gave his family hope. Karen mentioned that, even from his hospital bed, he was still cracking jokes, so she had to leave the room to laugh without disturbing the mood. After his passing, Don was laid to rest at Westwood Village Memorial Park in Los Angeles. His tombstone features images of him in many renowned roles, and the inscription reads, "He saw the poignancy in people's pride and pain and turned it into something hilarious and endearing." Don turned difficulty into laughter a decade later in his hometown of Morgantown, West Virginia. A statue honoring him stands in front of the theater, where he once performed as a young ventriloquist. The memorial depicts Don Knotts, the man who lived through it all, rather than Barney Fay.